Mr. Faramoy, thanks so much for being here with us. Let's jump right in and explain to the public how your particular cluster that's part of NEOC has been dealing with COVID-19.
So our cluster is EST 17, it's Telecommunications, ICT. And we work with our licensees, the telcos, the FM broadcasters, to make sure they're ready, usually for a hurricane, but during this crisis to make sure that they're still able to provide services to the general public.
Hurricane season is here. Some people think that, nothing's been happening as far as plans are concerned. What sort of happenings has been taking place as far as plans for hurricane season?
So usually during Q1, we ask our major licensees to update their business continuity plans for hurricane season. Mm-hmm. And this year we asked them to make sure that they were including elements to cover COVID. Of course, everyone's learning from this experience. Nobody has a handbook, so we've had to make adjustments as we go along. Right. But every year we make sure that our telcos especially are very well prepared, have their staff, have their resources in place, and have activated their plan and taken a look at it before hurricane season rolls around, and it was the same this year.
Okay. Any challenges? You did mention that this is an unprecedented time for all of us, but what challenges, if any, has the cluster faced?
Basically, what has happened is, from an operational point of view, if you're a telecommunications provider, what COVID gave you was a long dress rehearsal for something like a hurricane. So they already have well-established, well-oiled facilities and processes in place to make sure that their various aspects of their operations can function even during a challenging time such as this. So whether it's making sure they have first aid kits and masks and generators are topped up and that sort of thing, they've pretty much already gone through a lot of that already during the COVID crisis.
Okay. Did COVID present any challenges that the industry may have seen where they needed to improve and are working on those improvements?
I think everybody's learned a tremendous amount through this whole thing, not the least of which is how to work remotely. What has been particularly challenging for our sector, that is FM broadcasting and the telcos, is the economic impact. And that has had an impact on their revenues. So for example, the FM broadcasters have told us nobody's advertising, in part because their businesses are closed. Mm-hmm. So you can't exactly promote your bar, your restaurant, because nobody's open. But as we start to see the recovery coming through, we're hoping that they'll be able to recover some of those revenues and get back into a steady state. To help them, what we've done is we've worked on a number of programs to alleviate the license fees and the regulatory fees within the sector. Cabinet approved a proposal from us to push back some of those fees to give the industry a little extra breathing room in terms of cash flow.
Moving on to more in-depth subject apart from the hurricane. Of course, we've all been more than ever dependent on internet access during this time. How resilient are our underwater cables, and if they were damaged, let's say during a hurricane, what options do we have?
Generally speaking, around the world, as a submarine cable comes ashore, it tends to be much more heavily armored and wrapped in steel than it is when it's far out to sea, when the only thing you have to worry about is the occasional fish coming by to take a look at it. Cables around the world suffer from issues like passing ships dropping anchor on them, ships striking them with propellers or deep keels and that sort of thing. So typically what happens is lessons learned over 100 odd years of doing this, you make sure that where you're putting your cable, laying your cable, is not in a major shipping lane, number one, and that as it approaches the shore and approaches shallower water, it is up armored. So it is laced with more and more steel around it to protect it. In some cases, they're also buried in the sand of the sea floor to give them further protection. All of those things apply for the cables that we have in Cayman. And as we were saying, one of them has actually been, shall we say, embraced by the reef, which has now grown, and there's a lot of incrustation around that cable over the last 20 years, such that that cable is not going anywhere.
Over the years as well, more and more receivers and pieces of equipment are being placed on towers, such as the antennas for instance, are these able to withstand hurricane forced winds? I would imagine so. But and did we lose any in Ivan? And how do we go about repairing those when those types of things happen?
So there's basically three types of towers. There's the type of tower that is stayed by a set of wires. So that's a guide mast. It's a very thin tower. Some of the original ones were that. And typically if you go above 200 or 300 feet, that's the kind of tower you'll use. The second type is the type that has multiple legs, usually 4 legs, and it gets gradually smaller as it goes up. That's a self-standing tower. They typically, again, only go up to 200, 250 feet. And the third type is what's called a monopole. It's just a fat tube, basically. Those are shorter, typically used for cell sites and cell towers. The last two tend to be more resilient because they're not as tall and they are more structurally sound. The concern that you would have would be from the guide mast, which tends to be much taller. And if any of those cables break because of a falling tree or other debris flying around, then you might have an issue with that particular tower falling. We did have some of those go down during Ivan. In terms of the types of antennas, typically your cellular antennas, the mobile antennas, are much thicker and more robust for wind resistance and wind loads. And the way they're attached to the tower is much more secure than, say, a small microwave dish or any other type of smaller transmitter. Those you might lose in a minor sort of hurricane, but the more substantial mobile antennas are designed to withstand higher wind loads and are usually able to withstand Cat 2, Cat 3 storms.
How does your particular department, off-reg, work to ensure that the telecoms industry continuously work to build resilience? Is this how continuous is it, and how often are the systems and equipment and what have you being built or rebuilt to be stronger?
The way the industry was originally set up was through a set of regulations that would ensure that the telecoms networks were connected together. In part, that was to make sure that the competitors were able to connect without having huge costs. So it was a competitive issue, but it also is a resilience issue to make sure the networks are interconnected.
Right.
What we're working on right now is to improve that connectivity on the internet side. Almost 20 years ago now, when we first liberalized the telecoms market, the internet wasn't a thing.
Right.
Now it is, as you pointed out, is a critical part of our economy. So what we're working on are a new set of guidelines and regulations to ensure that the internet is interconnected as much as we can locally, and that our off-island connectivity is as strong, resilient, and capable of flexibility as much as possible. In terms of how often things like that change, this industry changes constantly. Everyone's phone is completely different than it was, say, 5 years ago. Everyone's computer at home or at work is completely different than it was 5 years ago. So the technology changes so rapidly that the industry is constantly reinvesting, constantly changing and upgrading, in part because customers want it, also in part because if they don't do it, their competitors will, which is one of the benefits of having a competitive landscape as we do.
Okay. Finally, we are, like I mentioned, at the early stage of hurricane season, which is predicted to be a little bit above average or above normal this season. More activity, more named storms, that sort of stuff. If for some reason we were impacted by a storm this season, do you think we will withstand it?
More than any other Caribbean island I've ever seen or been to, Cayman is better prepared than just about any other jurisdiction in terms of its professionalism, in terms of how closely the government and the private sector work together to prepare for and respond to storms. Just this morning, we had a National Emergency Operations Committee call, and on that conference call, which is happening now 3 times a week, you also have private sector representatives. So I've not seen the level of preparedness, of professionalism, of cooperation in any other country around the Caribbean that I see in Cayman. So I wouldn't want to tempt fate and say that we're going to be okay, but I would say that we are as well prepared as as anyone around us is, and as we possibly could be. There's always ways to improve, and I think the head of the HMCI, Director Coleman, is pursuing improvements every year as we go through these exercises, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from COVID and this hurricane season. Hopefully, we will prepare for nothing and take it forward from there.